have a lot of opinions about a lot of things about this community on campus that I don't think necessarily is going the way it should be, especially the big controversy about the Native American tuition waiver on campus.
I've never really gotten that question. It would like get raised up in class, like mostly by non-natives. Like I don't think they fully understand why we get it. They just think that we just get it for some unknown reason.
ネイティブアメリカンこの学校は奨学金でただっていうかほぼお金をあまりかからずに来れるっていうことを聞いて、結構そういうふうな優遇をしている学校なんだなっていうのに気づきました。
It's a tuition waiver for tuition, and they waive it, right?
Our native, you can get the free tuition waiver. I don't know very much about it.
I think it's a good thing that, the state of Colorado has had that agreement to give Native students free tuition. I'm not sure I would define it as fair, because I personally think that all education, from elementary school to higher education, should be free for everybody.
I don't want to be hypocritical and be asking about how they're getting waived tuition when my parents are paying for my schooling. It just seems like I can respect that. And
I think sometimes it's hard to see so many people with free tuition when me personally, I came from both my parents could not help me pay for school at all. I get money through the government because my parents don't make that much money and I pay for it out of pocket. And I think sometimes it's hard when you know how much you have to work to pay for school and you see so many students who may not appreciate it as much as others get free tuition. I know it's really important and I'm glad that we have it, but sometimes I'm a little bitter. I wish I was part Native American.
So there are students here that are Native American, and instead of spending just the regular 4 years, they're going on for 6 to 8 years because it's free.
I had a class this morning about that topic, and actually I had no idea. I really didn't know that it was like that. I think that maybe if you don't know the reason why it's like that, it could be like, oh, that's maybe not fair. It's not equal for people, but actually I think I realized this morning that it's for history, and this land, it's not of American people, it's from Native American people. They were here before, and they did this kind of contract with the government, so I think that it's fair.
Way back, there was a fort 12 miles west of town, Fort Lewis. And when that fort was decommissioned because it was not needed, there were 6,279 acres of land. And the federal government offered that land to the state of Colorado if Colorado would agree to tuition-free education for Native Americans in perpetuity. And Governor John Shafroth signed that contract between the federal government and the state of Colorado on January 25th, 1911. And ever since that time, we have had the tuition waiver. At first, it was only for a handful of students. And then it has grown to be over 1,000 students now. I think it's a very fortunate contract because I think education is the most important factor in people living up to their full potential.
I think it's a wonderful thing that that's true. I feel like it's very important for, in this day and age for people to go to college. And you know, a lot of, you know, people who live on the reservations don't necessarily have, you know, $9,000-$10,000 to, you know, pay for college every semester.
So the tuition waiver does help a lot because for my family, it's only my mom working, and like my dad, he's like on jobs on and off, so he doesn't really help my mom pay for bills.
Well, for me, the tuition waiver is one of the reasons I chose Fort Lewis because it makes it really affordable. Like, my family couldn't give me anything to go to college, and my mom told me when I was in high school that she couldn't provide me anything for college. So I worked hard, and I remember being in high school and just like staying after school and doing scholarship stuff.
My husband and I decided to come here because of the Native American tuition waiver that they have here. It helps out a lot, especially with having 2 kids. We needed to find a place where we would be able to not only learn but also afford it. So when we came out here 2 years ago just to look at the college itself, that's when we found out they have a tuition waiver. So we're like, yes, we should come here.
私の友達のうちの一人がネイティブアメリカンの子がいて、で友達がこのうちに遊びに行った時にいわゆるもう白人のアメリカの人のうちとはもう大きさとかある場所とかもう家そのものが結構違って、行った友達はすごいカルチャーショックを受けてたので、そういう風な社会的地位というかまだ社会で認められてそんなに時間が経ってないのかなっていうような印象を抱いたので、だからまだ金銭的にあんまり充実してない家庭がネイティブアメリカに多いのかなと勝手に予想したので、だからそういうふうな奨学金とかが充実してるのかなと思ったんですけど、それもいいことだと思います。教育はどんな子でも多分受けた方がいいというか権利だと思うので。
That reaches beyond their reservation, or beyond their family, or beyond their community, and beyond their own cultural tradition. So I think it's helpful all around.
Is one of the most incredible things that I think Fort Lewis provides, not only for the reciprocity for the Native community, but also to open up people's minds who aren't Native to the culture and to, like, I know for me growing up, I learned about the battles between cowboys and Indians and reservations, and then it was like, oh, and they're on reservations, and what now? There was nothing of after they were on reservations. I knew nothing about the current issues. And I think a lot of non-Natives can agree with that or resonate with that. So it's really amazing that it's like that we're able to learn from one another.
Actually, speaking candidly, I do think there is some conflict because obviously students in my situation and students that have it harder off than I do. My parents help me some way, which is very nice, but some students are paying for school entirely off of student loans. They're looking at 6-figure loans they have to pay off when they're out of school, which is absolutely heartbreaking, which is totally terrible. And when students have a shallow understanding of the tuition waiver bill, they think Native Americans don't pay a dime, and that's totally false. They do. They pay student fees, they pay for housing. The only thing Native Americans aren't paying for is their tuition dollars, but they're still paying at least $6,000 or $7,000 a year. So that is still a sizable portion. It's still a great responsibility. It's still a great hardship for many students. And I think that some Caucasian and non-Native students might have this misconception that Native Americans aren't paying, so there's some conflict there, like they don't have to work as hard, which I think is totally erroneous. So I think the school needs to do a better job of communicating the kind of dynamics of the tuition waiver, about how they're not going to school for free in any sense of the word, and how it's a service built upon Fort Lewis's own history, because Fort Lewis once was a Native American boarding school. And again, being a little more subjective here, those schools were places where Native Americans weren't allowed to have their traditional names. They couldn't speak their own languages. They had to speak English. They were assimilation schools. which, if you're looking at it historically, is pretty terrible in my opinion. Those were the Andrew Jackson days. So I think Fort Lewis really owes it to Native Americans to have this be a place where they can receive affordable education. Not a free education by any means, but a place in which they do have a level playing field, in a sense.
The reason why they're trying to think it's time to cut the Native American tuition waiver is that they think it's not fair to the others. And I can see why it's not fair. I work hard for my education here. I don't just decide to sit in my room all the time. But there's a lot of students on campus that do, and a lot of people can see that, and they take advantage of it, so they kind of abuse it. And so that's mostly why they want to. That's what the whole controversy is about. But there's also a lot of students on campus that work really hard for what they have here and what they're able to get here, and a lot of people take that for granted.
The thing that I'm not sure about is how much Native American do you have to be able to have this tuition, or because I also heard like to some people say like, yeah, I came to this university because it was free because I'm Native American, but they don't know anything about Native American culture, so I imagine that there's more than one people who might take advantage of that. So I think that it should be more control.
But it's hard to say if people who don't know their culture shouldn't get it, because I don't think that's what it was for. I think it was just to try to help students, and if they are part Native, then they should get it, I think, even though if they don't know their culture or anything like that, or don't even want to know it. That's unfortunate for them, but those students who do actually come to school here and are, very, have Native blood, but they don't know any of their Native history or culture. I know some students who are like, okay, well maybe I'll just take a class and see what happens, and I have a friend who actually started taking more classes and getting more into that. So I think it'll benefit everybody.
I just knew that my great grandmother Cardin, she was Cherokee Indian. So I honestly don't know much about the tribe though, because she herself went through a lot of what's the word I'm looking for? Prejudice, I guess. She had a hard time finding a job because she was Native. So they burned the papers that proved that they were Native American. I'm not receiving any part of the Native American tuition waiver, no. I've grown into an independent woman, and I wish that I could have taken advantage of the Native American waiver, but at the same time I'm glad I didn't, because there are people that deserve it and people who don't, and the people that do deserve it are the Natives and that are truly Native versus the 1/16th Native who knows nothing about their heritage. I don't think that's right. So for myself, even though if I wanted to pay all this money and get a blood test and prove that I'm part Native, I'm not going to do it because it's taking advantage of the system. And I don't think that's right. Final words. Okay.
I think that as a Native student, I need to be informed of why the waiver exists, like how it affects the school, what impacts it has. And then I think it's also not only the Native students on campus's responsibility to know why, but also any Fort Lewis student. They should have an awareness of why the school provides this to Native students and the history behind it. That way, like, even if there is animosity or disagreement on the existence of the waiver, it should still have, like, the students should understand where it comes from, because it tells a narrative and it also supports, like, empowerment of Native Native peoples and their story and just the people who were here before. Not saying that it's an entitlement, because it isn't. It's an opportunity.
Yeah, again, I would just hope to underscore, especially since I've worked so much with the administration on the tuition waiver, is that I really think that people need to understand that there needs to be a larger effort on behalf of the college to explain the tuition waiver. Because I remember as a freshman in orientation, I didn't hear a word about it. I just heard bits and pieces around the college, and I would assume most students learn that way too. There's not really an education session, and nor should I say there should be a formal one, but there should be something on the college campus that explains, here's what the tuition waiver does. Here's what the Native American students still have to pull on their own end, which is sizable.
So like I said, it's all about responsibility. It's the responsibility of every student and faculty as well, because faculty should in their classes be talking about it just as to enrich the students, to realize that you live in a world where you have to deal with other, well, not deal with, but interact with other cultures, other people with different ideologies, and college should be able to prepare you to interact with them in a way that is both conducive to your learning and to their learning, so that it's a two-way street. You learn from each other, and it's a fruitful relationship. And I think that's also part of the decolonization process, which is just both sides acknowledge the past and are moving forward in the future by assuming new responsibility.